it's about creating this new sense of place, this new sense of innovation, introducing, people to place, to people to a new product type, to a new way of living, all this kind of stuff. So making that introduction.
Let's discover the Cleveland entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are telling the stories of its entrepreneurs and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we're exploring what people are building in Cleveland. I'm your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today we're going to take a more literal interpretation of what is meant by what people are building in Cleveland by talking about literal physical buildings and the innovation and entrepreneurial story behind them. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dan Whalen about Intro. Intro is the 9-story construction complex currently undergoing development adjacent to the West Side Market on the corner of West 25th and Lorraine. Dan is the Vice President of Design and Development at HarborBay and has spearheaded Intro's development from inception to where it now stands en route to be one of the first and tallest mass timber buildings in the entire country. We cover a lot in this conversation, from the benefits and prospects for wood construction as a ecologically, structurally, and cost-superior construction material to steel and concrete, to the implications of Intro to the West Side Market, and ultimately the vision for Intro and its completion. I'm very excited to spread the word here about the scale and significance of the innovation that is happening right here in Ohio City. So please enjoy Dan and my conversation. So like we were talking about before we turned on record here, I've lived in Ohio City closing in on 4 years now, just south of Lorraine by St. Ignatius. And over that time, just walking around the neighborhood, I've seen a lot of changes. But nothing struck me quite like the demolition of that dual-purpose surface parking lot mini shopping center that occupied the space adjacent to the West Side Market. And I've been super interested since then in understanding what we would see in its place going forward. And so I've been following along as information has been made available. But I think, like many Ohio City dwellers, have been super excited to learn more about this development, which is why I've really been looking forward to having this conversation with you. So really appreciate you coming on, Dan.
Well, Jeff, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm glad people are interested in it. Obviously, the scale of it and the location of it are pretty high profile. And, from there, there's a whole lot of depth to the story, how it happened and how it continues to go forward and sort of what it'll mean for the city of Cleveland and, the broader region.
Yeah. I am excited to hear and learn as well. And I'd love to do that. But just before we dive into the specifics of the project and the history and all that, I'd love if you could just tell everyone a little bit about yourself, your personal background, and how you ultimately came to spearhead this project.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Cleveland guy, so born and raised on the east side in Willoughby. Went to Willoughby South High School. I went to Case Western Reserve. A lot of people locally know me because of my football career, but after school, ended up going away for a couple of years, coming back, went to grad school. And at that point in time, I was working for Snavely Group, who built some projects, down the street. They built a quarter most recently and worked on some other stuff. But that was kind of my first foray into real estate. And at the time, that was 2012, 2013, we had gone after the Market Plaza site and tried to purchase it with the plan to develop. And there were some studies done locally, and they never materialized with Snavely. So I went to Chicago, took a job there, actually worked for Scott Wolstein at Starwood for about 4 years. And in the meantime, I had been still kind of keeping my eye on Market Plaza, right? And I had been talking to the guys at Ohio City Incorporated. I've been talking to the owners. I was rubbing elbows with people in the neighborhood. And so it was really my side hustle to try to make something happen there. And through all the discussions, I was a 26, 27-year-old kid. And everyone that I talked to, the Tom McNair and councilman, and they all kind of looked at me like, how are you going to make something happen on this site, right? And the price tag and the discussions with the owner and all that kind of stuff. But I just stayed on it and just kind of hustled my way through. And a lot of things happened in the background, right place, right time with our group at HarborBay and just trajectory of my personal career. But eventually got the owners of that site, who was Daryl Young and his brothers, who built the center in 1989, I believe. And they'd owned it ever since. And legacy was super important to them, and not just what their legacy is, but what happens to the property after they let go of it, and what does it become, and how does it help the neighborhood. They genuinely cared about that stuff. So for us, I had a plan and a vision, and was able to describe what I wanted to do. At the time, none of that included timber, but it did certainly include this mixed use, large scale, dense, transit oriented project that was a little bit bigger and far reaching than what other people had proposed over the years. And so got Daryl comfortable and we made the deal, and now it's snowballed into what it is today.
You say made the deal like it was a piece of cake.
Not at all. Not a piece of cake, but a long time of kind of rolling up the sleeves and very slowly getting people comfortable that they're not trying to screw them over, because that's always the thing. People got to like you to make a deal. It's not always about money, right? Money's important and there's economics to every side, but it's also like you got to want to work with the person. You got to want to deal with that person, sit across the table and work in good faith. So I think there was just a lot of time spent in building a true relationship with the Young family, as well as the Ohio City Incorporated group, and then at the end of the day also the neighborhood block club. So that's where like all the heavy lifting went in, so that by the time we got to the finish line, it was not a whole lot of stress.
Yeah. So as you went about talking with these different stakeholders and building consensus, and ultimately to the point where you can proceed and get this green light, what was the vision you were painting for this development?
And I think it was mostly around playing to Ohio City's strengths, right? Ohio City already is an amazing place with really great bones, and it's got history, it's got authenticity. Obviously, the most historic piece of it is the West Side Market right across the street. It's an amazing building, both architecturally, what it stands for, kind of what it is as an operating asset for the city and for all of the jobs and all of the individual unique small businesses that operate within it, and the way it connects the fabric of the neighborhood and the larger region, and the tourist attraction that it provides. So all of that, plus the fact that you have this ongoing investment with improvements to bike infrastructure and the towpath trail and the Red Line Greenway, and continued, businesses that want to be in Ohio City, and the fact that you have access to downtown and the lake and, the river and Tremont and Gordon Square, all within a short, 5-minute walk or 10-minute bike ride in some instances. Those are all amazing selling points, right? And the fact that you're also in a neighborhood as opposed to, being downtown. You still have access to downtown. You have all the things that you want to be able to do within a short distance, but you also get to feel like you're part of a neighborhood and part of a community. And so all that really plays into sort of what the vision for the project became. And it was density, right at the transit oriented corner. You've got a train line that connects you one stop into Tower City, right? And that stop will soon be a half a block from Sherwin-Williams' new headquarters. You have all the other companies that house downtown, and right now it's a little bit of a weird time, right? Because nobody's necessarily going to work at the scale they were before, but that'll change and that'll get back to normal hopefully sometime soon. And then in the other direction, you've got the airport at a 15-minute train ride. You've got 9 bus routes that converge at the corner. You have Metro that provides 7,000 jobs. Their main campus that's undergoing a $2 billion renovation right now. So all this stuff kind of come together. It's like, well, why is there nowhere to live at this corner, right? Why is it still a 1989 strip center with a slew of tenants that, one could argue kind of have gone by the wayside and they're no longer relevant? So we just started to materialize and literally get on the whiteboard and throw ideas. And the first idea we had was, how do we make the project different than anything that exists in Cleveland? And that's where we started to get into the timber. And we always wanted to do density. We always wanted to make it a sizable project for the number of units and the number of apartments that we could provide. And then obviously add dynamic retail too, because Ohio City has a lot of great stuff, but it also has some things that it's lacking, right? It's got a need for other sorts of retail and destination-oriented services and daily needs type of things that are still a void in the neighborhood. So that all kind of comes together and pieces into like at least the program. And then the way the timber story evolved was something else. But that's kind of the vision for the project, and why this corner really demanded a high-profile building and with a mix of uses.
Yeah, no, it's the vision is clear. I love it personally. Before we dive into the timber story, which I definitely want to explore in depth, I'm curious, just some like hard facts about the site and development. Like, what is the estimated timeline? How many people, from a density perspective, do you foresee in this place? Just those kinds of ideas?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've been by the site recently, which I know you have, because you live in the neighborhood, it's under full swing, deep into construction. We're probably about 4 stories up right now. The timber is on site, it's being erected. So optimistic that the schedule is going to land where we think it will. And right now we're slated to kind of be wrapping up construction at this time next year. So right around end of January, early February, which seems like a long way to go because as you drive by, it's still very much a building structure that's only halfway up, but the timber will start to go really fast. We'll be chasing it with windows and walls, very, very soon. So that's like kind of the estimated timeline. We've already got some retail deals working that are also, what I want to do is I want to open our retail space with retailers in it as opposed to finish the building, have the apartments leased or open, but then we're still half empty with retail. So we're on a really good trajectory to make that happen as well. I think we have 35,000 square feet of retail, give or take, and we are either signed leases or working on leases for over half of it. And then a couple early discussions, which all things considered during this whole COVID experience, I think that's a pretty good sign. I think we're going to come out of this all right. And Ohio City, especially in the south side of Lorraine here, is going to have a whole new bunch of retailers and restaurants to supplement what's there. There's a bit of a changing of guard happening at that end of the street if you've been around there lately, but I think it's going to be good. I think refresh is not a bad thing. As for the rest of the building, we've got 300 apartments, and they're a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms, and then there is a penthouse floor that has a little bit more extravagant, larger floor plans that have a whole nother level of sort of unit amenities and technology and features that are above and beyond what the standard units have. And then something I'm really excited about is our top floor, the 9th floor, has a full-fledged, top-of-the-line, state-of-the-art event venue. And that's completely separate sort of from the residential experience. So it's not necessarily a common area. That's a business that we're going to operate up there, which can accommodate weddings of up to 400 people. Other events that are like standing room, cocktail type of events of up to 1,000. It's got a wraparound terrace that's got unobstructed skyline views right at the level of the clock tower at the West Side Market. So it's pretty stunning. The defining features of that space are heavily geared towards the timber, and the trusses that run across the ceiling is something that people are just going to be like awestruck by, I hope. So really excited about that. And that kind of rounds out the program. We do have parking. I failed to mention that, but kind of on purpose. There's underground covered secured parking, which is obviously an asset in the city of Cleveland, but at the same time, being such a heavily transit-oriented site in a neighborhood where you can pretty much accomplish everything you want on foot, I think we're going to have a fair bit of people that utilize the neighborhood assets from a transit standpoint to get around.
Yeah, I was going to ask about parking and the reception and feedback you've been getting on that. It's definitely a hot topic, I think, for local developments of any kind, considerations for parking. But no, I think in the transition to more density and the access to public transit, that is right there. I hope that more people are going to go that route.
I really do. I mean, I think it's a bit of a learning curve that'll happen sort of organically, because it's like if you don't live near transit, you're less inclined to take it or utilize it, or if you don't work near it, right? So the fact that now we can provide a bunch of housing units right on transit station, essentially, and between the retailers and restaurants, a bunch of jobs too for people that get to work using the bus or the train. I think what'll happen is you may not use the train day one living in an apartment, but maybe a couple months in, you're like, let me try the train to the airport. Let me try taking the train over to the Cleveland Clinic. And then you'll be like, wow, this is really easy. And it's $2 each way, and it gets me there on a very precise time frame. Like, this is easy, and I can answer emails, and I can take phone calls and do that stuff that I normally maybe couldn't be as efficient with if I were driving. So that's what I think will happen. And I think people, if they give it a shot, will really start to see the advantages of public transit, especially the fact that it's right there at your front door, less than 100 feet from the building.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about wood. I know that it is the foundation, literally, of what this building is ultimately going to be. I've just been very personally interested in this topic. It's one of the oldest building materials around, and all of a sudden in the past few years, we're seeing a bit of a resurgence of it and application in large industrial construction, skyscrapers, apartment buildings. structures of this size and scale. And I am very curious to understand why wood and where did that decision come from? And we can definitely dive a little deeper from there.
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, it sort of happened by accident. We were finishing up a project in Minneapolis, and right down the street, Hines, who's another large developer, they were finishing themselves a timber office building that they had just kind of dreamt up, and it was one of the first ones in the country. So we wandered down the street one day when we were in Minneapolis. We literally broke in the back door, kind of, someone was walking out, and we kind of propped our foot in and just started walking around. And it was amazing. It was such a unique environment that they created, and it was just strictly because of the building material and because of the way that the timber was exposed, and as opposed to it being, this old 1900s turn of the century type of thing that was very rustic and industrial. It was the opposite of that. It was very modern and sleek and contemporary and clean and bright. And so it was like, that's new, that's different. And so, as I mentioned, the center of our idea web when we were coming up with what the project was actually going to be was differentiation, right? Because you see a lot of stuff in Cleveland that's very much the same. And unfortunately, one of the challenges in Cleveland is cost to build is very expensive, and rents, when you look at them on a national basis, are very inexpensive. And so those two things make up for a misalignment when it comes to development and being able to spend extra money on things that people recognize as quality or as design aesthetic, things like that. So usually the first thing to get chopped is the stuff that makes a building just more aesthetically pleasing, I guess, right? And so we had the opportunity to start exploring and understanding timber, and we went to Austria, we went to northern Canada. Like, I flew on the single engine prop plane in the middle of a snowstorm up to basically the Arctic Circle to go see this logging factory that then was being used to create panels and beams out of mass timber. And so we kind of went to all ends of the earth to really learn about the project, literally, and came back and we're like, we have to do this. We have to try to make this happen. And there was challenges, right, with logistics and how are we going to get materials here, and with cost issues that I mentioned previously. It was like, all right, we'll got to really, really try hard to make this happen and dig in and do our research and understand how to make it feasible. And we did. We found great partners. We found outstanding engineers who had experience. The guys erecting the building, specifically the timber portion, they built the tallest one in the country. And so their crew is in here from Vancouver, and they've done this before. This isn't their first rodeo, and they're training Cleveland carpenters to do the same thing. And they're working with our general contractor and our other consultants to really teach and get everybody acclimated. So, all that said, it was kind of, we stumbled upon this project down the street from ours in Minneapolis, and that was kind of the thing that set the tone and really tipped us into going into the deep end and beginning to explore and research and understand and eventually become experts on the topic ourselves.
Yeah, it's an amazing exploratory story there. Where is the wood ultimately coming from now?
So I mentioned I went to Austria. So with the project of the size and scale that we have, there were actually only a few companies in the world that could produce what we needed to produce and deliver it without really limiting their utilization and capacity for other projects, right? We narrowed it down to 4 companies. None of them were in the United States. They were either Canadian, Italian, or in this case, Austrian. When we really touched and felt the product and then went to see their facilities, it was a no-brainer. So Binderholz is the company that's supplying our timber. They're based in Pflugen, Austria, which is not too far from some of the larger cities that people have heard of there, So the differentiating thing about their product, even from other mass timber, is that the European spruce and the fir that comes from the trees there is an entirely different color, and it's just brighter and whiter and cleaner than some of the wood that you'll see come from North American forests. So even that provides even another level of sort of uniqueness to our project. And if you drive by or walk by, you'll see how just stunning the wood is when it's in its raw form. So that's where the wood's coming from, and that's why it's coming from so far away. It's just because it's a pure supply-demand thing, and until there's more companies in North America that are able to get into the mass timber game, it's going to unfortunately be that way for a while. But I think we've established a really great relationship with Binderholz, and I think we plan on using them for the foreseeable future. Among everybody we talked to and interviewed, they were the most sustainable in terms of their practices. There's not a single ounce of waste that comes out of their factory. In fact, all the shavings and pellets and waste that happens in the process of creating timber is all reutilized to fuel the schools in their towns, the post office, the city hall, all that stuff. So they basically have this entire community in the valley between these mountain ranges in Austria that are kind of self-sufficient and fully reliant on the process that they've built. So it's really, really good in terms of its carbon footprint. And we felt like that was a major important piece of the story to incorporate.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely want to dive deeper on the benefits of mass timber construction, but I do want to address kind of what I imagine is the purple elephant criticism or fear that you're probably sick of hearing at this point. But there's an old fable I remember from childhood. It was like the three pigs and the wolf, and you build your house out of straw or out of wood, and the wolf's gonna blow it down. You build out of bricks, it's gonna stand the test of time. And then with that, there's the concerns of fire and wood. And I know it's far more nuanced than that, and I kind of want to dive a bit into the nuance. But because most of these cities have some history of some unprecedented historical mass fire that I think kind of planted probably seeds of doubt for wood buildings, much in the way that like Chernobyl has made it very hard for us to come to, some kind of comfort with nuclear power. And so we abandon wood for steel and concrete, and our short-term aversion has maybe gone too far, and maybe the pendulum is swinging back. But I would love to hear, what is the reality of the risks or not of wood construction?
It's a question we come across almost every day, right? From someone that we're teaching or someone that's learning about it. And honestly, there were questions we had when we started getting into the research and understanding of the product. So, those old, the Chicago fire and the fires that have happened in certain cities across the country in the olden times, it's easy to cling to those as like the examples, but those are once in a generation type of events. Yeah, there's fires in wood buildings, and at the same time, there's lots of 4-story wooden buildings that get built around Cleveland and around tons of major cities across the country every day, right? Problem is when you start going up taller than that, that's when you have to use concrete and have to use steel structurally more than anything, right? It's not so much that the fire concerns are a major issue. It was, 2x4s can't support that height of a building beyond 4 or 5 stories. So it was just like default. You had to go use other materials. But as you start digging in and start really watching all of the research and testing and studies that have gone into the mass timber construction industry and development of the product itself and the engineering, it performs light years better than those other materials in almost every instance, in earthquakes, in fires, in explosions, in you name it, right? Like, it's not just resilient, but I don't know if you ever heard the book Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, but like, it's not just, it can rebound when in the events that it's actually stronger than it's even remotely kind of crossing people's minds. So I think the beautiful thing is we have the opportunity to educate. We have the opportunity to walk people through. We have the opportunity to teach people and show physical data that's been compiled over the last 5-10 years in support of the product. And it really does. It acts completely different than what your mind might tell you a wooden building would do in the event of a fire or a catastrophic event, right? So it's something that most people just like, we have a discussion, they ask the question because it's like, hey, they gotta ask the question, and then they kind of get on board. But I don't have too many people who are like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine living in a 9-story timber building. I mean, there's tall wood buildings in other parts of the world that have been standing for many, many years. I mean, there's buildings in China made out of wood that are multiple 100 feet tall that have been there for almost 1,000 years. And so for every anecdote about a fire that burned down a city, there's one like that to kind of offset it. And these are not small pieces of wood. They're not 2x4s, 16 inches on center. They're 2 foot by 2 foot pieces of wood that have been compiled using smaller pieces and glued together and hydraulically pressed and form these large columns and beams and floor plates, right? So the floors themselves are made out of that product as well. And in the event of a fire, they're designed to develop a char layer And that char layer basically insulates the log and protects it and eventually will fizzle out. And so the part that does burn is the non-structural portion, and it burns at a very precise rate, which one of the things that we had on our agenda to talk about was like discuss it with the building department and fire department. Well, when a firefighter goes into a steel building, he or she has no idea how long they have until that steel gives out, right? Same for concrete. Like the concrete gets too hot, it'll explode, and it'll do so spontaneously. Steel, you don't know how hot it is at any given point in a fire, and the hotter it gets, the more likely it is to fail structurally and melt. Well, wood burns at a very precise rate. They know exactly to the eighth of an inch how much of that log or how much of that beam or column is going to burn based on when the fire started and over what time period. So this is all stuff that we have a book, it's like 1,200 pages thick to support, and that stuff all got the building and fire department on board with us going to what we're doing. And so you're going to see more and more projects popping up around the country because the engineering and the science is in a much faster pace than the building code and then the rules and regulations that are still based off of things that occurred in 1850, right? So that's my long-winded description of sort of the whole conversation about structure and performance in fires. So I'm excited to honestly for people to get a look and really start to understand it. And I think people will. I think they'll do the research on their own. Like just, hey, I'm curious. How does this work, right?
Yeah, no, it seems really exciting just as someone interested in the topic and who is also interested in the ecological considerations of it. But you have what seems to me is like this renewable, low carbon, like prefabricated resource that like obviously to everything that you just explained can do the job and probably better than some of these materials we've been using. And it's very exciting.
It really is. And another question we get and I guess a challenge that we get is, well, how is it better for the environment if you're cutting down trees to make these buildings? Well, the amount of wood that is produced to create our building is grown in North American forests every 12 seconds, right? So like when you put that in context, trees keep growing. They're not they're harvested sustainably. And obviously a big portion of that is heavily reliant upon how sustainably the forests are managed, right? You can't go chopping down everything because then you're going to run out of resources and trees don't grow back overnight. It's important to note that we're not cutting down 80-year-old trees that have, lived these long, amazing lives and grown to 300 feet tall. It's like these are mostly young growth forests, and they're trees that are 8 to 10 years old, and they're thin and they're easily reharvested and replanted, and that's the business plan. Because obviously, if you were to cut down all the forests, the companies doing this would run out of work and run out of economic benefit too. So there's a big, deep chain of the way that this all works. And, another reason we went to Binderholz is just because they're out in front of it. They're ensuring that every step of their process is sustainable, renewable. You did mention renewability. Like wood is the only renewable construction product out there, right? Like you can't, like concrete doesn't grow on trees, it's like steel has to be produced. The carbon footprint of actually producing those materials is insane, right? You talk about the amount of construction traffic on site. Well, if you had watched the project kind of happen during the concrete phase of the parking garage and whatnot, there's a ton of trucks, a ton of pumping, a ton of all this kind of different, what I'll call pollutants, right? That happen, whether it's through the truck traffic or whether it's through the actual process of pouring and making concrete versus wood. It all comes in on, far less number of trucks, and it's lifted up with a crane, put into place by two guys with a wrench, and they move on to the next one. So it's a lot less intrusive. It's a lot less disruptive construction process. And I think just front to back for the whole entire life cycle of the building, from the time it's a tree harvested in the woods to the time that, the building finishes out its useful life 100 years from now, the carbon footprint reduction will be so enormous. And so that's really what we're trying to put forward. That's why, the building is going to be a case study. It's going to be a place that people fly in to Cleveland to look at, to understand. We already have people through the construction process that have been visiting during COVID, getting on planes, coming to see because they're really wanting to get involved and try to figure out how to grow it and do it themselves. So that's one thing I don't think people, both regular old citizens of the city, as well as the government and the people that we worked with to get this off the ground, I don't think everybody recognizes just how how big of a deal it is and how different it is and how special, and yeah, I'm the developer of the building, but it's pretty cool. And to be able to do our first timber building as a company in my hometown at arguably its most high profile corner, I mean, kind of a fairy tale, right? I'm excited to see it all come together.
Yeah, me too. One thing I would love to get your take on, you mentioned the lifespan of a building, if you will, around 100 years, century, potentially. What I've been curious about is, especially for a project like this, is how you think about and ensure that the infrastructure will be able to adapt to the rate of change of new technology and kind of stand the test of time. When you think about, I don't know, 2120, right? Like literally 100 years from now, and this thing is an elder building. How do you think about, the longevity of a project like this and the impact that it could have and your vision for that?
Yeah, I mean, such a good question. I mean, right across the street, you have one of the most historic buildings in the city, right? And it's been there over 100 years. It was built in 1912. Before that, I don't know how much history you know about the West Side Market. It was across the street in a smaller format. And before that, really, there was like the Central Market down kind of where Progressive Field, kind of stands. And so there's just this history of these historic buildings. And we wanted to make a building that, again, in 50 years, people are going to look back and go, that's historic as well, in a completely different way, in a completely different timeline, what it symbolized at the time it was built. So that was another kind of piece of the pie as to why we did timber, right? And I really do believe that because our project is so large, because of its height and scale in terms of there's not been a building in the United States at all, in even Canada, who's way out ahead of us on this cross-laminated timber trajectory. Like, there hasn't been a building as big as Intro. Like, there just isn't. And so it won't be the tallest building for probably more than a few months. There's a building going up in Milwaukee that is going to be 25 stories of timber. And so, we'll soon be eclipsed by that. But the goal was never to be the tallest. The goal was just to make a statement. And the goal is to innovate and do something, groundbreaking and different and unique, and do it in Cleveland, right? Like, in a Rust Belt city that has this narrative and this notion that, like, it's the kind of little sister to all these other great cities, and then just has this, 50 years of population decline and yada yada. Like, it's like, let's do something that people can rally behind. And then you throw in COVID, that just kind of, the week we break ground, COVID, the world shuts down. It's like, I think more symbolically and more like what the project stands for in that regard is I think what I'm going to end up looking back and be proudest about when it's all said and done. It's the thing that, again, when I'm walking my kids down Ohio City 25th Street in 25 years or whatever it may be, right? Say, yeah, well, here's why that building is just as historic as the one across the street in its own way. That's kind of like, again, a defining feature. It's more than just a regular old apartment building. Those are a dime a dozen. They get built every day. But this has got a lot more parts to it that tell a pretty sweet story.
Yeah. So speaking of the proverbial building across the street, I would like to talk about the West Side Market for a sec, as it is kind of.
Get me started on that.
Well, yeah, I'll just let you run. Just West Side Market.
Well, I've become fully ingrained with relationships there over the past 3 or 4 years, specifically as our project's gotten rolling. But you have many vendors who have had the keys passed down from their parents and their parents' parents, and they're running the stand that their uncle started in 1940, right? Like, that exists, and that exists in large quantities. You also have a new contingent of people that have started businesses and have taken a chance at launching in the West Side Market and doing something from the ground up within this context. And then you have the notion that the city is the operator, owner of the building and the processes and the systems and the maintenance and all this other stuff that takes place. All of those things coming together create a lot of challenges. And again, I'm an outsider looking in, right? But at the same time, I have a brain. I can look. I can think. I can take notes and observe. And I see a lot of small little tweaks that can be made at very cost effective to very little capital intensive adjustments. And they're not being made. And you have the city at fault big time, wholeheartedly, just neglecting it, right? You walk by the market on a given Wednesday, 10 o'clock in the morning. Most times you can't tell if it's open or closed. You don't know. It's not lit. The doors are, I don't know how old. They've got chain link, metal in the glass. They've got all kinds of things that really almost inhibit you from being able to come inside. If you don't know that the market's open on Wednesdays, then you're more than likely, not gonna notice that by looking at it right standing in front of the building. So little things like that, like the building doesn't have adequate heating or cooling. In the middle of summer, it gets 95 degrees. There's no air conditioning in that building. All right. And the infrastructure is not updated, and the plumbing, and you have challenges with that. Right. And the city is responsible for all kinds of things like that. And they really, truly don't understand how to operate that business, nor really do they have the skill set to try. And so there's a stubbornness that's been taking place politically to let go of the operation of the market, right? Not the ownership. They own the building. The city's going to own the building probably to eternity, but the operation and the caretaking and the focus and the sense of urgency, right? That's something, those four things are the city will never have, no matter who you put in and who's got control. So that's a problem, right? And then you have vendors that, quite frankly, they're all on different pages. And you have some that believe one thing and some that believe another. And there's a really big fear of change and evolution there for the vendors that have been around a long time. And that goes down to what the stands look like. It goes down to what other types of vendors should be allowed in and shouldn't be, what types of services are going to be provided in the market, what hours they're going to operate. Like some people still want to have the hours they had in 1950 when, by and large, women were at home and doing the shopping during the day while kids were at school and the husbands were at work. The world doesn't work that way anymore, right? There's changes. There needs to be different approaches. And when you have a building that's got 100 plus unique vendors in it, they really got to all be moving the same direction. There's got to be a process. There's got to be a means and methods to get, buy-in and consensus, and then, debate, figure it out. And then, unfortunately, if not everybody goes the same way, we vote, you go, right? That's unfortunately how it has to go. But you have people that won't open on Wednesday at 9 a.m. because they don't do any business between 9 and 12. And so you go into the market on a day it's open, and half the vendors might not be doing anything, right? They might be dark. And so no one is completely, I think there's multiple parties at fault, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit to tackle. I have this manifesto that I've been writing over the past couple of years of I spend almost every day down there when I'm in town, right? Because I'm right across the street, and I walk by and I walk through and I talk to the vendors that I know, and I talk to the market operator and the manager and the city. It's there needs to be effort, there needs to be energy, and there needs to be a focus, and none of that currently exists. Just a lot of fighting and lack of aptitude, right? From the city's perspective, they don't have what it takes. And it just needs to be put on the table because it's not an opinion, it's a fact. And so until there's a change in how the market is operated and how it's funded, I think you're going to have a challenge. But you go back to one of the reasons that we chose to develop this corner, and it's because of the market. It's because this one-of-a-kind public asset that's there. It's been there for 100 years, and hopefully it's still there 100 years from now in terms of what it is and what it's, again, stands for. But its current trajectory, we're going to have some problems if there's not some sort of collaboration and change of direction.
Yeah. One of the things that has just been a debated topic amongst myself and some other people living in this Ohio City neighborhood, as we've walked by the building and kind of theorized about the future prospects of it, is whether or not it would be a boon or competitive with the West Side market in any way. I'm curious your take on that.
You mean in terms of our project, either competing or supplementing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our business plan has always kind of harnessed the idea that we go as the market goes and not the other way around. And we want to support it. I want to put density right there so that there's 500 people living right across the street that realize just how easy it is to go buy a pound of meat on Tuesday and fruits and vegetables on Thursday, whatever. Those are bad examples because the market's closing these days. But you get my point. The fact that you can live across the street from a market that, if you go look at the prices too, you can get meat in the West Side market, super high quality butcher meat, for less than you're going to pay at almost any other store, sometimes less than it's sold wholesale to restaurants. And so not only that, but you can do it just by walking, pressing the crosswalk button and going across the street, grabbing it and going back to your apartment. I mean, that is such a major selling point, right?
Yeah, it is.
And there's no other building literally in the city of Cleveland that can say that can say, I can walk to the West Side Market within 3 minutes, get what I need 5 days a week or however many times you want to shop, whether you want to shop per meal or shop, in bulk, you can do it. And look, anything you can't get there, Dave's is actually a pretty darn good option as well. I mean, the Dave's in Ohio City does a good job. I mean, there's not everything you can get there, but between those two, between Ohio City Provisions, between the grocery, like there's options across the board for that sort of thing. And I think that opens up this wide net for us to the type of person that wants to rent at our project, right? I think there's a lot of older couples and even some families that is like, they would want to rent. They'd want to live in the city of Cleveland and move back from the suburbs, but haven't found the building that checks enough boxes for them, right? Doesn't have access to green space, doesn't have access to the grocery. It doesn't have a great nightlife scene. And at the same time, the things we mentioned at the beginning of the call, like the access to Tremont, to downtown, to Gordon Square, to the lake, to the river, to the airport. Like, again, it's all these reasons why we felt the project demanded special attention, both, from the scale and then eventually, to the type and material and the construction that we chose. And it tells a really awesome story. So all of that supports more why the city of Cleveland and the vendors who operate inside the market need to get aligned and need to figure out how to find common ground. And, we don't always need to open the door to consultants and committees and all these different people and then take 12 months to make plans to make plans. It's like, no, it's eventually time to just do stuff, right? It's time to stop putting pallets and trash cans out in the alley between the large building and the arcade portion. Put some picnic tables out there. Don't let your city electric trucks park in there. It's like, take care of the space, and encourage vendors to do the same and require them to do the same. Dude, I could go on and on. It's such a, I'm telling you, I have a 15-page document that I've just been adding bullet points to over the past couple of years. And I've just been watching the discussions that take place both on Twitter and in the paper and on Cleveland.com and, in the political arenas. And it's like everyone wants to overcomplicate it. It's just, it needs attention. It needs some capital injection to take care of basic things that is just deferred maintenance. And then it needs, people to be okay with getting on on board with evolving and getting into the 21st century, right? Because people's tastes have changed, people's shopping patterns have changed. I think you can only have so many stands in the market that sell raspberries, and you can have so many stands that sell pork shoulder, right? Like, I don't need 12 butchers. I just don't need that, and I don't think anybody else does. So eventually you're going to have to offer up the potential for other types of businesses to kind of get in there. But that's just the tip of the iceberg for.
Yeah, I would love to dive down that rabbit hole and indefinitely. We are coming up on some kind of time here, though. I do have a few more questions, though. I'm curious what the public local perception and reception has been to Intro.
Yeah, well, the name Intro too kind of came from just us figuring out what we wanted it to be about. Right? Market Square was very identifiable. It's like, when I tell you we're the West Side, we're next to the West Side Market, everybody goes, oh yeah, okay, good, got it. But Intro was really about this idea of, if you go to the website, introcleveland.com, which we kind of set up as a landing page for people to check out when, just to get interested, get acclimated. Eventually that'll have floor plans and whatnot as we get closer to being ready to do so. But it tells you what the name is all about, what is in the name. It's about creating this new sense of place, this new sense of innovation, introducing, people to place, to people to a new product type, to a new way of living, all this kind of stuff. So making that introduction and talking about that and doing so with the block clubs and the community groups that we had to actually get on board with ahead of time before the project was actually able to push forward. I was expecting there to be a lot of community pushback just because it's scale. It's a large project and it's different, right? And it's parking and it's congestion and it's this. But when it came down to it, we didn't come into the block club meetings in the community process to basically shove stuff down people's throat. We listened, we asked questions, we we proposed what we wanted to do, and we proposed, it's kind of it didn't really change much from what you see in the renderings and in the news. And the feedback was resoundingly positive. Sometimes you go into Ohio City block club meetings, depending on which block club you're dealing with, or it's not unique to Ohio City, so I don't want to pick on it, but and you'll get people, say, not in my backyard. We're not doing that here. I like the project, just not there. Move it over, one neighborhood away. But we didn't have any of that. We had, I think our block club, when they took a vote to allow the project to kind of go to the next phase of public approval, it was like 19-1, right? And so I don't know who the one was, and I don't know why, right? But when you look at that and you look at the fact that we only had to go through that process once, whereas some developers in other parts of the city have to go through it 5, 6, 7 times, and their project changes and evolves and gets chopped in half, all these kind of things. Like, we didn't have to do any of that because I think people realize that this corner demanded something that has been lacking for such a long time. And so, that it's insulated being on a commercial district and all that kind of stuff. So we didn't really have the concerns of abutting next to any residential properties or anything like that. And we tried our hardest not to displace any of the businesses without having a plan on where to put them. And so you'll notice that when you drive around the immediate area, and 5 or 6 of the tenants that were in Market Plaza are relocated into brand new spaces that were previously empty, down the street. So not only did we work really hard to keep those businesses operating, but we filled vacancies in other places that previously had no retail in them. And so that's only more beneficial for the neighborhood too. So, Keep Bank, Sherwin-Williams, H&R Block, Spectrum, those businesses, the nail salon that was in Market Plaza, they're all still up and running. They're just in the new locations, and that's a real success story too. So I think across the board, the community process has been resoundingly positive. Just people seeing the building go up too, they're just amazed at, wow, it's not what I expected. It's different, And once we get to get past the construction phase and actually walk people into the finished product, I think it's only going to be exponentially further and better than the feedback we've already gotten.
Yeah, I am very excited to see it come together. So we spent a lot of time really geographically focused on this specific corner of Cleveland. But one of the things that I like to ask everyone coming on is to ultimately paint like a collective collage of people's favorite things throughout Cleveland. And, maybe it is the West Side Market, and we'll stay honed in on this block. But I'm curious what your favorite aspects of Cleveland are, and your hidden gems.
Oh man, I there's so many. I mean, I really think Cleveland has a lot of potential. It's got a lot of great things. It's also got a lot of potential. Every time I bring people to Cleveland for the first time, they're kind of awestruck and they're like, well, this is surprisingly cool. And I'm like, well, maybe your expectations were too low to begin with, but it's like I'm batting 1,000 on that. Like bringing people to Cleveland for the first time and they're like, man, this place is great. And so I think setting that aside, some of my favorite places around town. I mean, there's such great little dive bars. There's places to go have a beer and hang out. Cleveland has such a great beer culture. I think its restaurant scene needs to kind of catch up. I still feel like we're living on the coattails of Michael Simon and Jonathan Sawyer and Zach Bruel, and like those guys are outstanding, right? They set the tone for what the food scene is, but they also have been around like 20 years, and a lot of their restaurants have been around almost as long. And so it's time to evolve. It's time to do some cool stuff. Cleveland lags behind sometimes when you talk about development and hospitality and where it's going. Not to say that's not disparaging, but I love getting out on the towpath to go running. I mentioned I'm in town almost every week right now for construction. I'm actually in the process of relocating back to Cleveland permanently, indefinitely, whatever that means, but at least for a few years. So I'm actually packing up. I've spent 7 years here in Chicago. I'm going to come home, finish the project out, and we're actually starting another business that we're launching right there in the city, which I can talk about soon. Not quite yet, but
we'll have you come back. We'll have you come back.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm excited about it. And it directly pertains to some of the stuff I was just mentioning. So I'll clue you in. But my mom still lives in the east side of Cleveland. My brother's there. There's so much to it. Like there's just a quaintness to Cleveland in general that I think is hard to capture. And obviously the sports culture is one of a kind. So, for me, coming back after living in Chicago for 7 years, which is like this huge cosmopolitan, massive place with just about anything you could ever want. Well, Cleveland has a lot of the same things, maybe on a smaller scale, but world-class orchestra and amazing research facilities and institutions and great sports and awesome outdoor spaces that are only getting better as entities like the Metro Parks and other, community development organizations put more effort into creating connected neighborhoods and stuff like that. So again, I'm being long-winded and I'm kind of dodging your question about, specifically what types of places are my favorite, but it's home. It's where I grew up and I'm excited to where it's going. So we will see.
Yeah, and we're excited to have you back. Well, yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, Dan, and sharing your story and everything that's going on with Intro. I personally am stoked about everything that you guys are working on and really have enjoyed just on my runs every day, just seeing how fast this thing has come up. And it sounds like it's going to be going even faster. But
yeah, it's really coming along. I'm excited. I really think it's going to be a game changer. I think the dynamic street level stuff we're doing, the park space we're creating, it's all thoughtful, purposeful, community oriented. So yeah, I'm excited. I mean, I hate to use that boring word. Excitement is just kind of like a lame, boring, blah word, but it's true. I mean, there's just so much cool stuff going on, and I'm proud and happy and grateful to be a part of it all.
Well, if people have anything they want to follow up with you about, learn more about Intro, you mentioned introcleveland.com. Is there any other place people should be reaching out?
For now, that's the way. You'll start to see opportunities to check in on apartment availability probably late summer of this year, 6 or 7 months before we start occupying apartments. We're going to start marketing the event space here shortly, and that'll be the first thing that we kind of put out there to the public eye. And we'll set up a little booking space and office there on 25th Street where Wild Cactus used to be, is what it appears we're going to be utilizing. So that'll be happening in the next 30 to 45 days. And from there, we'll just continue to unveil marketing and imagery and unit types and all that kind of stuff as things go on.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to it. And thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, so shoot us an email at layoftheland@upside.fm or find us on Twitter at podlayoftheland, @thetegan, or at sternhefe, JEFE. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Tegan Horden and Jeffrey Stern developed the Lay of the Land podcast in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the companies which appear on this show unless otherwise indicated. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Founders Get Funds and its affiliates, or Actual and its affiliates, or any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation, nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.